Welcome to our channel. Today we are going to take a look at the movie Mr. Harrigan's Phone. If you're ready, let's begin. In the small town of Harlow, young Craig lives with his father, who has been in a perpetual state of sadness since his wife's death. Every Sunday they attend church together, and during the service, Craig is allowed to read from the Bible to the congregation. The antisocial billionaire Mr. Harrigan notices Craig and decides to visit him later to make a job offer. He wants to hire the boy to read books to him since he is blind. Craig is unsure why he was chosen over other, possibly smarter or better readers in town, but he is not willing to miss the opportunity to earn some extra money. Harrigan's mansion is on the outskirts of town, and 3 times a week, Craig walks there to read books and enjoy tea prepared by the maid, Edna. Some of the books are advanced for his age, but Craig gradually learns to understand them and enjoys the philosophical discussions they bring. He also takes pleasure in exploring the grand rooms in the mansion and Harrigan's flower collection, although there is a locked cabinet that he is not allowed to look inside, rumored to contain terrible secrets according to Harrigan. Occasionally, Craig does small chores around the house, like shoveling the snow on the veranda, but when it comes to newspapers, Harrigan reads the financial news himself. As Craig spends more time with Harrigan, he becomes increasingly curious about the man's past, and one afternoon he finally gives in and searches for him on Google. It turns out Harrigan was a ruthless businessman known for hostile takeovers, which generally made him disliked. He never married or had children, and few of his relatives got along with him, implying he led a very lonely life. Because Craig always felt guilty about his mother's death, he feels more sympathy for Harrigan than he should. 5 years pass, and as Craig enters adolescence, he never gives up his visits to Harrigan's house to read, only missing one day when he had the flu. Even when he was sick, he still felt guilty, suspecting that the time they spent together was the highlight of Harrigan's week. Since Harlow doesn't have a high school, Craig has to take a bus to the nearest city every day to attend school. It's quite surprising for a small-town boy like him to be knowledgeable about cliques and social rules, especially considering he doesn't have a phone while most of the local kids do. Still, he manages to make a few friends. The most shocking part of his first day is when he's approached by a bully named Kenny, who expects him to shine his shoes in the bathroom because that's what newcomers do. Craig refuses, and the conversation escalates until Mrs. Hart intervenes. Craig isn't a snitch, so he tells her everything is fine. Unfortunately, Kenny doesn't take it as a friendly gesture and promises Craig will have a hard time in the future. When Craig returns home after school, he doesn't tell his father about the incident but asks for a phone instead, which is denied. During his next visit to Harrigan, he asks if Harrigan has had any encounters with bullies or people trying to take advantage of him in business. Harrigan confirms he has, and that he deals with them harshly. A few months later, when Christmas comes, Craig receives 2 great gifts. His father finally buys him a phone, and Harrigan's lottery ticket wins him $3,000. Craig calls Harrigan to thank him for the gift, and Harrigan explains that it's just a small gesture he does for everyone he considers a friend. Having a phone allows Craig to sit with the popular kids and connect with a cute girl he likes. Making new friends doesn't deter him from continuing to visit Harrigan, and this leaves Harrigan curious about why he keeps coming despite having a social life. Craig explains that he genuinely enjoys spending time with Harrigan, which brings tears to the old man's eyes. Hearing such a touching response, Craig convinces his father not to put all the lottery money into a college fund and uses some of it to buy Harrigan a phone. Initially, Harrigan refuses, fearing he might become addicted. He has no TV or radio, but Craig changes his mind when he shows him he can follow the stock market and news in real time instead of waiting for the next day's newspaper. From that point on, at every visit, Craig teaches Harrigan new ways to use the phone, including setting up a voicemail and choosing a nickname, as the newspapers had given him the moniker Pirate King. As weeks pass, Harrigan becomes more addicted to the phone and sometimes ignores Craig's readings, but he's easily brought back on track. When Harrigan begins to need an oxygen tank for sleeping, Craig starts to worry and wonders why Harrigan chose to live in such a small town far from advanced care services. Harrigan confesses he wanted to live somewhere people wouldn't ask him about his past. In return, Craig reveals his desire to move to the big city to become a screenwriter. Harrigan doesn't approve of this because in such businesses there are always enemies that come your way, and he makes Craig promise that if he enters this career path, he will swiftly and unapologetically eliminate all of his enemies. Craig is influenced by Harrigan still holding power in the state even this week, but he also feels sorry for Harrigan because he found a drawer full of lottery tickets, which means he didn't have many friends to send them to. A few days later, while Edna is on leave, Craig comes to the mansion, and after waiting a long time for Harrigan to open the door, he enters. Unfortunately, what distracts him is not the phone, but even worse, Harrigan, who has died with the phone in his hand. This is a deeply disturbing and sad sight, and when Craig realizes that Harrigan was about to call him, it affects him even more deeply. Crying, Craig calls his father for help before honoring Harrigan's life with his favorite literary quote. An ambulance and the police arrive to take care of everything. And when Craig returns home that night, he is so exhausted that he doesn't even notice he brought Harrigan's phone with him. As a final farewell to his closest friend, Craig sends a message to Harrigan's phone, saying he will miss the afternoons they would have spent together. Not many people attend the funeral, but Craig still reads a chapter from the Bible and places Harrigan's phone inside the suit on the deceased. Harrigan is buried next to Craig's mother, visited by his father every week, but Craig himself only came once because it meant accepting that he was gone forever. After the funeral, the man responsible for Harrigan's financial affairs hands Craig an envelope containing a letter explaining what the old man left him as a legacy. Although Harrigan didn't approve of Craig's career choice, he wanted to support him, so he left an endowment of $800,000 for university and any postgraduate studies he might choose. The most shocking part is a PS, where Harrigan says he will miss the afternoons they would have spent together, almost as if he were responding to Craig's text message. Craig wants to dismiss it as a coincidence, but he can't stop thinking about it. On a stormy night, Craig calls Harrigan's voicemail and leaves a message thanking him for the gift, but also confessing that he would give it back to have his friend back if he could. The next morning, when Craig wakes up, he finds a very strange message on his phone. Somehow, Harrigan is texting him, but the response consists of a series of random letters and words. Terrified that they may have buried Harrigan alive, Craig becomes frantic and asks his father for help, but his father explains that it's probably just a prankster copying the number. Harrigan can't be alive because a full autopsy was performed before the hospital released his body for the funeral. Visiting the graveyard and calling Harrigan's phone, Craig is disturbed when he hears the ringtone coming from the grave, and he can't shake off the feeling that something strange is happening. Later, Craig visits Harrigan's home and has tea with Edna. Edna confirms that Harrigan left her and the gardener some money, and she acknowledges that Harrigan was a good man, but she didn't want him to be on the wrong side. For instance, the previous gardener had stolen from him, and Harrigan had made him regret it. Edna refuses to provide details, allowing Craig to pick something to remember Harrigan by. Craig selects one of Harrigan's favorite flowers. Shortly afterward, Harrigan's house goes up for sale, and in the meantime, Edna is allowed to look after it. Feeling better, Craig returns to school and enjoys his classes, especially thanks to Ms. Hart, a highly supportive teacher. Kenny no longer bothers him much, and he eventually gets expelled from school for selling drugs on campus. Though Craig was not the one who reported him, Kenny still thinks he is. Things get even better when Craig attends the winter dance with his crush, but the perfect night takes a dark turn when Kenny returns to school, confronts Craig for snitching on him, and threatens to kill him if he ever talks about it. A few minutes later, Craig is found by Ms. Hart, and she suspects Kenny's involvement, but Craig denies it because he just wants to graduate without getting into more trouble. When he returns home, Craig refuses to discuss what happened, causing his father to suggest that he should talk to someone instead of bottling up his emotions. Taking this advice, Craig calls Harrigan's phone to share his fears through a voicemail. The next morning, the town is shaken by the news of Kenny's death. Seeing Kenny's family grieving, Craig is overwhelmed by guilt and realizes that even bullies have people who love them. He can't stop thinking about this all day, which distracts him during his classes, so Ms. Hart talks to him after school to comfort him and remind him not to blame himself. Ms. Hart, always understanding, brings up the topic of ghosts, and Craig mentions what happened to him. Ms. Hart admits that she doesn't like dealing with Ouija boards and similar things because her grandmother taught her that not all spirits are benevolent. Later in the day, Craig visits the place where Harrigan's former gardener lived. A neighbor tells him that the man's prospects became impossible after Harrigan fired him. Curiosity gets the better of Craig, and he checks out the man's truck, only to find a bunch of tickets inside, which makes him even more upset. As Craig leaves, he spots unfinished graffiti on the garage door, clearly insulting Harrigan. In the evening, Craig calls Harrigan's phone asking for a sign regarding Kenny's death, and as soon as he hangs up, the phone rings with Harrigan's number, but the message is somewhat meaningless. The next day, Craig meets with the local priest and shares what's been happening. The priest, along with Craig's father, believes that someone probably copied the number as a prank. Trying to make Craig feel less guilty, the priest shares the details of Kenny's death. He was heavily intoxicated, tried to sneak out of his house, slipped and fell, indicating it was an accident. However, what the priest doesn't know is that Kenny's mouth was filled with shoe polish. The priest advises Craig to reconsider his obsession with the phone, and Craig decides to buy a new phone model to do just that. A store clerk who sets everything up for him explains that the strange messages might have been a glitch in the software. All the contacts are transferred to the new phone, and when Craig tries to call Harrigan this time, the call fails and he finally assumes it's over. When he arrives home, Craig initially throws the old phone away, but he soon regrets it and puts it in a box full of little mementos. With Kenny's tragedy and his friendship with Harrigan always on his mind, Craig graduates from high school and is accepted into a university in Boston. When he leaves home, he thinks he might see his father and his mother bidding him farewell. University life is actually wonderful, and Craig enjoys being surrounded by the subjects he loves, but it doesn't take too long for tragedy to strike again. One night, he receives devastating news from his father. Mrs. Hart, a Dean, has lost her life in a traffic accident caused by a drunkard named Dean. Devastated, Craig rushes home to attend Mrs. Hart's funeral and watches Dean's disappointing trial that ends in a plea deal. Dean had multiple previous arrests for drunk driving, and he had lost his driver's license, but he managed to avoid prison by promising to enter rehabilitation. This outcome infuriates Craig as he searches through his childhood bedroom and finds an old flower crown that his mother had made for him even after her passing. However, this small memento doesn't provide him with the comfort he needs. While searching through the box, he discovers his old phone and dials Harrigan's number, leaving a voicemail expressing his desire for Dean's death. The call was made in a fit of blind anger, and after regaining his composure and returning to his regular routine, Craig can't shake the guilt of what he did. He constantly searches Dean's name on Google to reassure himself that he's still okay. A few days later, when Dean's death is reported in the newspaper, Craig's fear becomes a reality, but the reason behind it is still being investigated. Determined to uncover the truth, Craig drives to the rehabilitation center and impersonates a journalist to pay a nurse for information. It is believed that Dean did it himself, as he was found dead in the shower with half a bar of soap stuck down his throat, and an autopsy revealed that the presence of shampoo indicated he had ingested it to ease the soap's passage. What makes the case even more disturbing is that the soap was the same brand used by Mrs. Hart, and Dean's farewell note contained a quote from Harrigan's favorite song. As soon as the nurse finishes providing details, Craig returns to his car and experiences a complete breakdown when he realizes that he has become a murderer. Upon returning to his old home, Craig discovers another strange message from Harrigan and finally looks inside the secret closet after his death. He finds that it contains only memories of Harrigan's childhood, especially those related to his deceased mother. Craig believes that Harrigan was always as lonely as he was, and he attempts to stay in touch, visiting Harrigan's grave and wondering if these messages were Harrigan's way of telling him to stop. Thanking Harrigan for everything and apologizing to his mother through tears, Craig rushes to the town quarry, initially considering ending things for himself. Fortunately, he sees the clarity before doing something foolish and instead throws his old phone into the river, ensuring that Harrigan can rest in peace. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications to watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching.